December 24th, 2009. Christmas Eve at Loro Parque, Tenerife. Children are unwrapping presents across Spain while families prepare for holiday celebrations. But in the depths of Orca Ocean, something dark is stirring. 29-year-old Alexis Martinez enters the water with Keto, 6,600 pounds of frustrated apex predator that has spent 14 years in concrete captivity, never knowing freedom, never understanding why his world is so small and cold. The Christmas Day show rehearsal should be routine, safe, just another training session before tomorrow's holiday performance. But Keto's black eyes hold something that Alexis cannot see, something that 29 years of captivity have twisted into rage. Sound of splashing suddenly stopping, then a massive impact in water. In 8 minutes, Spain's Christmas Eve will be stained with blood. The young trainer who believed in the magic between human and whale will discover that some bonds can never be forged. Some creatures can never forgive what captivity has stolen from them. The trainer's dream. Alexis Martinez was living his childhood dream at 29 years old. Born February 27, 1980, he had grown up fascinated by marine mammals, drawn to their intelligence, their grace, their mysterious connection to an underwater world that humans could only visit briefly. Like so many young people inspired by marine parks and documentaries, Alexis believed he could make a difference. He could be part of something beautiful, the collaboration between human and whale that seemed to represent the best of both species. He could help educate the public about these magnificent creatures while providing them with care and enrichment in captivity. His path to Loro Parque had been deliberate and focused. He studied marine mammal behavior, learned training techniques, developed the physical fitness and mental discipline required to work safely with apex predators. His colleagues described him as dedicated, professional, genuinely passionate about the animals in his care. Alexis had been working with the orcas at Loro Parque for several years. By December 2009, he knew their individual personalities, their preferences, their moods. He understood the protocols that kept trainers safe while allowing them to work closely with creatures that could kill them without effort. But there was something about Keto that had always been different. The massive bull orca carried himself with attention that other whales didn't show. He responded to training, performed his behaviors, interacted with humans, but there was always something held back, something wild that captivity had never quite contained. Alexis, like all marine mammal trainers, had learned to read these subtle signs. But on Christmas Eve 2009, either the signs weren't there or they weren't clear enough. The young trainer who had dedicated his life to understanding orcas was about to learn that understanding and controlling are very different things. The product of broken systems, Keto's story, began with an ominous sign. He was born tail first at SeaWorld Orlando on June 17, 1995. A breech birth that should have warned everyone that this orca would never fit easily into the artificial world humans had created for him. From his first breath, Keto's life was defined by human decisions rather than natural instincts. Separated from his mother too early, shuttled between facilities, forced into breeding programs, confined to concrete tanks that were a fraction of the vast ocean territories wild orcas claim as their birthright. By 2006, when he arrived at Loro Parque as part of SeaWorld's breeding loan program, Keto had already lived 11 years without ever experiencing freedom. He had never felt ocean currents, never followed migration routes, never learned to hunt with a family pod. His entire existence had been choreographed by humans for human purposes. At 14 years old in 2009, Keto was reaching sexual maturity, the age when wild orcas begin to establish their place in complex social hierarchies and claim territories spanning hundreds of miles. But Keto's territory was a concrete pool. His social group was a collection of unrelated orcas from different populations, speaking different dialects, following different cultural traditions. The psychological stress of such an existence is impossible for humans to fully comprehend. Imagine spending your entire life in a single room, surrounded by strangers who don't speak your language, forced to perform meaningless tricks for food, never allowed to make meaningful choices about your own life. Keto carried that stress in every movement, every interaction, every forced performance. Staff at Loro Parque had noticed increasing signs of frustration and aggression, stereotypic behaviors that indicated psychological distress, warning signs that this particular orca was reaching a breaking point. But the show must go on. Christmas was coming, and families expected to see orcas perform magical underwater ballets. The fact that one of those orcas was psychologically damaged by decades of captivity was not the audience's concern. The Christmas Eve rehearsal, December 24, 2009, dawned clear and warm in Tenerife. The perfect weather for a Christmas Day show that would delight families and generate revenue for Loro Parque. Staff arrived early to prepare for the final rehearsal before the holiday performance. Alexis Martinez suited up for what should have been a routine training session with Keto. These rehearsals were essential for ensuring smooth shows, allowing trainers and whales to practice their choreographed routines without the pressure and distraction of live audiences. The Orca Ocean facility at Loro Parque was state-of-the-art by marine park standards. Multiple pools, underwater viewing areas, sophisticated filtration systems. To visitors, it looked like an aquatic paradise. To orcas who belonged in the vast Pacific, it was an elaborate prison. As Alexis entered the water with Keto, everything appeared normal. The massive orca responded to initial cues, positioned himself appropriately, showed no obvious signs of agitation. Other staff members were present around the pool area, providing the backup and observation that safety protocols required. But something was building in Keto that human eyes couldn't detect. Some combination of frustration, territorial instinct, sexual maturity, and the chronic psychological stress of captivity was creating conditions for an explosion of violence that no training could predict or prevent. The first few minutes of the session proceeded normally. Alexis and Keto moved through familiar routines, practicing the underwater choreography that would dazzle tomorrow's Christmas audience. To observers, it looked like another example of the magical bond between human and whale that made marine park shows so compelling. Then, without warning, everything changed. The attack. What happened next unfolded with the swift brutality that makes orcas the ocean's apex predators. One moment, Alexis was working through routine training behaviors with an apparently cooperative whale. The next moment, he was trapped in the grip of 6,600 pounds of pure predatory power. Keto's attack came without obvious warning signs that humans could recognize. No gradual escalation, no clear behavioral cues that indicated impending aggression. The massive orca simply decided that this training session was over, and that Alexis Martinez was no longer his trainer, but his prey. The initial grab was devastating. Keto's jaws, powerful enough to crush the ribs of a great white shark, clamped down on Alexis with hydraulic force. The young trainer, who had spent years learning to work with these animals, suddenly found himself completely helpless against their raw power. But this wasn't a quick killing bite, like a wild orca might deliver to natural prey. This was something far more disturbing. A prolonged attack that seemed to combine predatory instincts with the psychological damage that decades of captivity had inflicted on Keto's mind. Witnesses watched in horror as the massive orca dragged Alexis underwater repeatedly, the way wild orcas drown seals and dolphins. But between these drowning attempts, Keto would surface, holding the trainer's body, manipulating him like a toy. The attack seemed to go on forever, though it lasted only minutes. Staff members who had worked with marine mammals for years watched something they had never seen before. An orca that wasn't just killing but seemed to be expressing rage, frustration, and psychological damage through violence against a human being. The crushing. The autopsy report would later reveal the clinical details of how Alexis Martinez died, but the witnesses who saw it happen understood immediately that no human being could survive what Keto was doing to him. The massive orca used his body like a living weapon, compressing Alexis's chest and abdomen with force that human bones and organs simply cannot withstand. The young trainer's ribs cracked under pressure that could crush a car. His lungs collapsed as Keto squeezed the life from his body with calculated precision. But the most disturbing aspect of the attack was its duration and apparent deliberateness. This wasn't a wild animal acting on sudden instinct and then moving on. This was a prolonged assault that seemed to express something deeper than simple predatory behavior. Keto held Alexis underwater until his lungs filled with water, then brought him to the surface only to compress his chest again until the air was forced out. The cycle repeated multiple times, a form of torture that no wild orca would inflict on natural prey. The other staff members present could only watch helplessly as their colleague died in front of them. There was nothing they could do to intervene against an animal that weighed more than 3 cars and was expressing 14 years of accumulated rage and frustration through violence. When Keto finally released Alexis's body, it was clear that no medical intervention could save him. The young trainer who had entered the water, believing in the possibility of partnership between human and whale, stayed as evidence of what happens when that belief collides with the reality of psychological damage inflicted by captivity. The aftermath. The emergency response at Loro Parque was swift but futile. Alarms sounded throughout the facility as rescue teams attempted to separate Keto from Alexis's body. Standard protocols were followed to secure the orca and provide emergency medical assistance to the trainer. But Alexis Martinez was already beyond help. The compression injuries to his chest and abdomen, the fluid in his lungs, the massive internal trauma, all combined to ensure that the attack was fatal within minutes. He was pronounced dead at the scene, his Christmas Eve shift having become his final moments on Earth. The park's immediate response revealed the industry's instinct for damage control. The Christmas Day show was canceled, but efforts began immediately to minimize media coverage of the incident. This was not the kind of publicity that marine parks wanted, especially during the holiday season when families were most likely to visit. The attempted cover-up was partially successful. Unlike Dawn Broncho's death just 2 months later at SeaWorld Orlando, Alexis Martinez's killing received minimal international media attention. The location in Spain, the timing during holidays, and the industry's efforts to control the narrative combined to keep this tragedy relatively quiet. But within the marine mammal training community, Alexis's death sent shockwaves. Here was an experienced trainer, working with an animal he knew well, following established safety protocols, killed without warning by an orca that had seemed manageable. The pattern of violence Alexis Martinez's death was not an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of increasing aggression from orcas in captivity that the marine park industry had been trying to manage and hide for years. Just months before killing Alexis, Keto had been involved in another incident with trainer Brian Rokeach that had nearly resulted in injury. The warning signs were there: increasing frustration, stereotypic behaviors, aggressive responses to training situations. But the industry's response to these warning signs was not to question the fundamental ethics of keeping apex predators in captivity for entertainment. Instead, they implemented additional safety protocols, modified training techniques, and continued to put human lives at risk in pursuit of profitable shows. Keto's psychological profile was typical of orcas that had spent their entire lives in captivity. Never having experienced natural social structures, territorial behaviors, or hunting instincts, these animals developed abnormal behavioral patterns that could explode into violence without warning. The tragedy wasn't just that Alexis Martinez died. The tragedy was that his death was predictable, preventable, and entirely the result of human decisions to prioritize entertainment value over the psychological welfare of apex predators. The industry's denial, following Alexis's death, Loro Parque and SeaWorld, which technically owned Keto through their breeding loan program, worked to minimize the incident's impact on their operations. Enhanced safety protocols were implemented, but the fundamental business model remained unchanged. Keto continued to perform in shows despite having killed a human being. He continued to be used for breeding despite clear evidence of psychological damage. He continued to live in the same concrete tanks that had contributed to his psychological deterioration. The industry's position was that Alexis's death was a tragic accident, an unpredictable event that could not have been foreseen or prevented. But marine mammal experts outside the industry saw it differently, as the inevitable result of keeping intelligent, powerful predators in conditions that would drive any creature to psychological breakdown. The attempted cover-up of Alexis's death would prove counterproductive when Don Brancheau was killed just 2 months later. The pattern of orca attacks on trainers became impossible to ignore, and the industry's credibility was severely damaged by their attempts to minimize and hide these incidents. The final reflection. Alexis Martinez died on Christmas Eve 2009, preparing for a holiday show that would never happen. His death marked the beginning of the end for the marine mammal entertainment industry, as the world had known it. The young trainer who had believed in the possibility of meaningful relationships between humans and orcas became evidence that such relationships are impossible when one party is psychologically damaged by captivity and the other is unaware of the depth of that damage. Keto lived for 15 more years after killing Alexis, performing in shows, being used for breeding, exhibiting continued signs of psychological distress. He died in November 2024 at age 29, decades younger than wild orcas can live, his entire existence defined by human decisions rather than natural instincts. The cruel irony of Alexis's death was its timing. Christmas Eve, a time of joy and celebration, became forever associated with the moment when an industry's fantasy of cooperation between species collided with the reality of what captivity does to apex predators. Sound of distant Christmas carols, then fading to respectful silence. On December 24, 2009, Alexis Martinez entered the water with Keto for the last time. He went in as a dedicated trainer preparing for a Christmas show, believing in the bond between human and whale. He stayed as prey for a predator that had been psychologically broken by 29 years of captivity. His death preceded Don Brancheau's by exactly 2 months, creating a pattern of violence that could no longer be ignored or explained away by the marine park industry. Together, these two tragedies changed everything about how the world viewed orca captivity. Alexis never lived to see the changes his death would help bring about. He never saw the decline of marine mammal shows, the rise of public awareness about captivity's costs, or the growing movement to retire performing orcas to sea sanctuaries. But his legacy lives on in every family that chooses not to buy tickets to orca, shows every young person who decides to pursue marine mammal conservation in the wild, rather than entertainment in captivity, and every orca that might someday swim free because people finally understood what captivity costs. The Christmas show that Alexis died preparing for never happened, but his death helped ensure that fewer such shows would happen in the future, as the world slowly learned that some forms of entertainment are simply too expensive when the price is paid in human lives and animal suffering. In the end, Alexis Martinez's final gift was helping to free the very creatures he had loved enough to die for. It was a gift he never intended to give, but perhaps the most important one he ever could have offered.